It's my honor and privilege to introduce you to our speaker today. Carolyn Kinnan is an environmental horticulturalist and has worked with the Healthy Garden, Healthy Home program since its inception in 2005. She's done more than 100 workshops for us, and she's developed more than a dozen different modules like this to present to the public. Carolyn is currently an instructional associate at the Miracosta Community College, and she's also been an instructor there. Carolyn got her degree in environmental horticultural sciences with an emphasis in integrated pest management from one of the premier institutions in our state, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Carolyn Kinnan. Take it away, Carolyn.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Scott just left me a hard act to follow. That was a wonderful introduction. We're just going to jump right in by starting with an explanation, or I should say some background on the Healthy Garden, Healthy Home program. This program is a cooperative effort between the University of California and the County of San Diego Watershed Protection Program. The goal of the program is to bring information to San Diego County residents about how we can win the battle against pests in our gardens and landscapes, and at the same time, reduce the use of pesticides and excess fertilizers that contaminate our watershed. So to get started, I want to show you a short 3-minute video that does an excellent job of illustrating what a watershed is and how these materials end up in the watershed. And then we'll start talking about winning that battle against these pests. So here we go with our video.
Have you ever been walking along a quiet beach without a soul in sight and suddenly stumbled across a pile of trash? You've probably asked yourself, where did all this garbage come from? There's hardly anyone here. The truth is, it may have traveled a further distance to get to the beach than you did from your home. You see, when water moves downstream, it carries with it things you can see, like plastic bags and cigarette butts. It also carries things you can't see, like pesticides and fertilizers. Even though it's not as obvious as the trash, pesticides and fertilizers that get in the water can hurt the small animals and plants that live there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how these pollutants got to the beach, we need to know a little more about a thing we call a watershed. What is a watershed? Well, basically, a watershed is a geographic area that drains to a common water body, but it's so much more. Each watershed includes an ever-changing system of water bodies, such as streams, creeks, drinking water reservoirs, lakes, estuaries, bays, and in most of the watersheds in San Diego County, the Pacific Ocean. In San Diego County, we have 11 watersheds that drain west towards the Pacific Ocean. The waterways in these watersheds provide San Diego County residents with water for a multitude of uses, including our water supply for drinking and industry, irrigation for landscape and agriculture, support for wildlife and estuarine habitats, and recreational activities. Remember the trash on the beach? It was probably carried there through the streams and storm drain systems within the watershed. Ultimately, trash, pesticides, fertilizers, and even soil from erosion will reach our beaches, causing an unsightly mess for residents and wildlife. So wait, let's look at that again. The water in the ocean comes from the streams and creeks. The streams and creeks pick up runoff from the land further upstream. So that means if I spray pesticides on my lawn in Lakeside, use too much fertilizer on my tomatoes in Fallbrook, or throw a bottle on the ground in Bonita, these materials can run off my property, flow down my street, enter into a storm drain or stream system, and then end up in the ocean. Remember, if you spray something in your garden or on your landscape, there's a good chance it could end up at the beach. So what happens if this waste and pollution end up on the beach? Trash on the beach can not only dampen our fun, wildlife can become entangled in it or swallow it. Even though fertilizers and pesticides are not as visible as trash, they also have a big impact on the health of the watershed. With more than 3 million people in San Diego County, can you imagine the amount of waste and other pollution going down our watersheds? You get the picture, and it's not a pretty one. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like the day at the beach that I'm looking forward to this weekend. So what can you do to help? Put trash in a trash can. Reduce your use of pesticides and fertilizers around your home and garden. Whenever possible, use non-toxic or less toxic methods to solve your pest problems. Also, watch your irrigation system and adjust it to reduce runoff. This can help reduce water pollution from pesticides, fertilizers, and soil erosion. By taking a few simple steps, you can have an enormous impact on improving and protecting the health of our watersheds. Remember, it's the water that connects us. For more information on how you can make a difference in protecting your watershed, contact the San Diego County Watershed Protection Program at 858-846-0800 or visit our website at www.projectcleanwater.org.
Okay, thank you for watching that video with us. I also want to make the clear point that the Healthy Garden, Healthy Home program is reaching out to San Diego County residents because we are the major source for contaminants in our watersheds and water resources. So what can we do to reduce those contaminants and still control or manage is a much better word, those pests that interfere with our ability to grow beautiful, healthy gardens? We're going to talk about a strategy today called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. IPM is a least hazardous strategy that combines several methods for controlling pests and maintaining healthy gardens, rather than relying on just that one method, pesticides. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about how pesticides can actually create a worse problem. And once we start using pesticides, we end up on a treadmill. It's hard to stop using those pesticides because of some of the issues they also cause. Additionally, pesticides can have toxic effects on those non-target organisms, like our children, grandchildren, pets. Sometimes they can cause plant damage if applied incorrectly or at the wrong time or the wrong product. And then the ever-present and very helpful beneficial insects or natural enemies. I'll refer to them that way at some point. As you can see here, this lady beetle is eating an aphid. So they are great helpers, these natural enemies in the garden. I also just want to remind you that when pesticides are applied, they can also drift and land on other things you don't intend to apply the pesticide to. So remember that pesticides don't stay put. And so integrated pest management will allow us to reduce the use of these materials and some of the issues they cause. When we use integrated pest management, one of the things we need to remember and accept is that we can't eliminate these pest organisms from an outdoor environment. They live there. They are going to come in from the nursery plants you bring home potentially. They blow around in the wind. So some of these insects move quite readily. Some are just blown around, but there's no way we're going to eliminate them. So we have to accept that we have to put up with a number of these insect pests. The goal with integrated pest management is just to reduce the population numbers to numbers that are not aesthetically disturbing or damaging to our plants. I also want to say at this point that integrated pest management does not eliminate the use of pesticides, but we want to use the least toxic material, apply it in the proper manner, and only when needed. So I'll talk more about that later on as well. Why does integrated pest management work? It works because it's scientifically based on the interaction of organisms in the environment. So if we understand how to grow our plants to their optimum health and how those pest organisms interact with the plants, how does the organism feed on the plant? Where does it feed on the plant? How does the organism reproduce? What is its life cycle like? We can then apply strategies some of those combined strategies that will be more effective for the long term. In other words, we kind of hit them where they live, reduce their numbers. That is going to save us time, money, and effort in the long run. And then, of course, it reduces or even eliminates often the need for pesticides. The key to integrated pest management is prevention. If we can prevent an outbreak, or even sometimes prevent the movement of the insects into certain plants, we can reduce the numbers right off the bat. We're going to start with planting healthy plants, selecting and planting healthy plants, because healthy plants are better able to withstand attack. You will have the pests, but a healthy plant may not succumb to the attack from these organisms. How do we select healthy plants? There's several things we want to look for, whether we're starting seedlings from home ourselves or buying them in the nursery. We want to avoid planting dry plants or choosing dry plants and overwatered plants. The reason for that is the effect on root systems. A root system, whether it's overly dry or overly wet, is not functioning the way it should, and that plant is already stressed. You don't want to put those out in your garden. It's not a healthy start. Root-bound plants, sometimes they'll work. A lot of times they're not going to grow. They'll be stunted. They're not as healthy as they could be. So whenever you can, look at the root system before you purchase a plant. You also want to look for evidence of existing pests. We don't want to bring them home from the nursery. So look for that. You'll see signs like shown here, leaf miner. You may see evidence of sap-sucking pests, which I'll talk about. Especially look for snails and slugs. Snails and slugs like to hide at the bottom of your containers or in between those little cell packs that you buy vegetables or flowering plants in. You can leave them behind in the nursery. Don't bring them home with you. You also want to choose appropriate plants, because putting the right plant in the right place is going to make for a healthier plants. So you need to look at the location where you want to start your garden or put plants in your landscape. What is the light like? Is it full sun all day? Is it part shade part of the day? What is the heat like? Are there walls or fences that might be reflecting high light intensity and heat onto those plants? What is your soil like? Is it heavy clay? Is it well-drained sand or something in between? And then the space. You want to make sure whatever plants you choose to put in that location will have room to grow to maturity. Plants that compete with each other, planted too close together, or one plant is outgrowing another, some of those plants are going to be unhealthy no matter what you do. And we don't want to over prune plants like trees and shrubs, for example. That also makes for unhealthy plants. When you're choosing a variety of plants to plant in a garden, whether it's vegetables or landscape ornamental plants, you want to make sure those plants are compatible in their needs. They need to have the same water requirements, light, whether it's full sun or part shade, that they'll grow in the soil condition that you have, and that they also require the same nutrition. Excuse me. Some plants need to be fertilized regularly. Other plants wouldn't need to be fertilized at all if you're putting them in native soil. So we need to learn a little about our plants before we make those choices and put them in the ground or the garden bed. Prevention can also mean choosing pest-resistant plants. Some strawberries, the short day varieties, for example, are resistant to powdery mildew. That's that fungus, I'll talk about that in a while, that coats your leaves in the white powdery mildew. Tomatoes and peppers, many of your vegetable plant seedlings or starts and seeds will be labeled with disease identification codes. VFN is one alliteration of those codes. You may see some variations on that, but what that means is The V means the plants are resistant to verticillium wilt, which is a root rot disease, fusarium wilt, also a disease, and root knot nematodes. Those are very common soil-borne diseases or organisms that can infest plants under the right conditions. If we grow our plants healthy, oftentimes these diseases and organisms never become an issue. But if we can buy plants that are resistant, that's even better. So look for those codes on your seed packets and plant labels. And then of course you have resources available to you for some varieties that may be resistant or better suited to San Diego growing conditions or conditions in your particular situation. So ask your nursery professional. I will also be showing you some references that are available through the University of California on their website. You can order them online. Prevention also includes proper preparation of the planting site and proper planting. So you'll notice we're preparing. We're doing a lot of preparation in advance of planting out our garden to give those plants the healthiest start possible. So they'll be as readily able to withstand attack from these organisms. First and foremost, control weeds. Weeds are going to compete with your desired plants for water, nutrients, space, sunlight. They grow faster than your desired plants, always. So you want to make sure those weeds are controlled. I'll talk more later on about how weeds can also harbor diseases and pests that may move into your desired plant. The best methods for weeding are hoeing, pulling weeds by hand, and you want to get the roots out. I'll talk more about weeds later. Soil solarization is a way we can deal with weed seed. If you know you have an area that's had weeds seeding, flowering and seeding, there's a lot of seed in the bank, right? Or you have disease issues. I know we have an area in our garden at home. My husband likes to plant palm trees. He's tried it 3 times. Every palm has died of a disease. So we no longer are going to put palms there, and we should probably either allow that soil to dry out completely to reduce the number of infesting organisms, or we can do something called soil solarization. And you can see here where I've included these pictures in a step-by-step process where you would till the soil, level, rake the soil to remove debris, make sure it's level the way you want it, water that soil. It's very important that the soil be moist. And then you cover that area with clear plastic, pin that plastic down so that it keeps the moisture in the soil. And then the sun should hit that area for as long as possible each day for a number of weeks. 4 to 8 weeks in the hottest part of the year will kill that weed seed and reduce the number of infesting organisms in the top layers of the soil. That is a process. You may have to put off planting for a season, but it's worth the wait. I've done this with replacing lawns and various things where we needed to kill off like a Bermuda grass and the weed seed and things like that there. Before planting, you want to loosen any compacted soil and mix well. If you're going to amend the soil, mix the amendment in well. And you want to amend and mix and loosen the soil at least 6 inches deep, a little deeper if you can do it, but don't pulverize your soil. You don't want to create a situation where you have the finest particles of soil compacting again over time with irrigation and foot traffic if you're walking around to maintain your plants in that area. When you're ready to plant, you can also slightly loosen the container soil when you take the plant out of the container and mix that with your native soil. The same when it comes to amending. You have dug your hole to plant your plant. you want to mix your amendment, the container soil that may be loose with the native soil. You never want to plant strictly in an amendment or a potting soil when you're planting in the ground. So always mix with your native soil. Your native soil contains nutrients, and you also don't want to create a situation where the roots are growing in this beautiful, easy, well-drained, beautiful soil, and then they hit, the real soil, like a clay hard pan or something, and then they stop growing. So mix that native soil very well, or with the amendment in with the native soil. When you're planting trees, you should always plant trees and shrubs about 2 inches higher than the soil level in the container. In other words, leave that container soil about 2 inches above ground level, or even in garden beds. The reason for that is so that the water drains away from the crown where the trunk or stem meets the roots. Never create wells around your plants, because the water sitting right at the crown of the plant will cause rot and disease. And that plant, if it does grow, will never be as healthy as you want it to be. Vegetables, on the other hand, some of them like tomatoes and peppers, things like that, you can actually plant them deeper. You can bury the stem as far as the first leaf. The reason for that is that these plants will develop roots along the stem for better stabilization, more water and nutrient uptake. Other plants like cilantro, onions, things like that, you do not want to bury those any deeper. You should plant them at the same level that they're growing in a container, for example. Always water thoroughly about 2 hours before you put the plants out. Water the plants themselves, and then water thoroughly after planting. This is very important to settle the soil around the root system. Roots do need oxygen, but we don't want to give them too much air. It dries out the little root hairs that take up the water and nutrients. So always water thoroughly, and you need to apply enough water that it travels past the root zone so that the roots are fully wet, and there's a water reservoir for those roots to take up water over the next few days after planting as well. Prevention, finally, includes cultural practices, the way we care for our plants. It's very important to provide for the needs of the plant throughout their lives to keep them healthy. So we're going to, again, learn about our plants. What is it that the requirements are before we plant them, and how best to take care of them afterwards. So you can see here, I've included some resources. Pests of the Garden and Small Farm. I'm sorry that that's a little bit blurry, that picture there. That's an excellent resource, not just for pests, but also for helping you choose the appropriate plants, varieties, vegetables, how to plant them and care for them. The California Master Gardener Handbook, also an excellent resource. And then if you go to the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, or UCANR website, which you will be receiving in an email after the presentation, a link to that. You'll find wonderful publications for various specific crops, as well as general information on all kinds of landscape plants and vegetables and so on. One example is these vineyard pest identification and monitoring cards to help you identify and manage those kinds of pests. Okay, so we've given our plants a healthy start, and we're ready to battle those pests when they do occur. We're going to look at several different methods. Remember, we're going to combine methods to keep ahead of these pests. One of the most important things we can do is pest identification. If we don't know the pest that we're dealing with, we won't be able to apply the appropriate strategies if we don't understand its biology. Once we do, we can apply the appropriate control measures. We want to encourage natural enemies during all of our cultural practices. And then again, if we do need to use a pesticide, we want to use the reduced risk, least toxic pesticide that will control the pest and apply them correctly. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. I'm going to cover the most common garden pests, garden and landscape pests. And I've broken them into 4 categories based on the damage they do. So we'll start with insects and mites because they have sucking mouth parts or chewing mouth parts, and we'll talk about those. They produce honeydew, the sucking insects do. And then of course, the chewing ones cause chewing damage. Snails and slugs also chew plant parts. We want to learn to identify the difference between snail and slug damage and caterpillar damage, for example. Diseases and nematodes. Nematodes are microscopic roundworms that live in the soil. They're put in the disease category because they do cause disease-like symptoms. And then weeds, we've talked about that a little bit, how they compete for space, water, nutrients, and light, and why it's important to control them. I also want to point out at this time that not all of the organisms in our gardens and landscapes are bad. Many of them are great organisms that can help us to control these pest organisms. They can go a long way to reducing the populations of these pests. And you'll see here that I've put an asterisk next to those categories that also include natural enemies or beneficial organisms. So that's another reason why identification is important, to make sure we're not trying to control or minimize the number of something that's good in our garden. We'll start with everyone's favorite pest to hate, are aphids. They have sucking mouth parts. You've probably all experienced aphids. They do reproduce by live birth. They don't lay eggs. So you'll notice here in this middle picture where it says ID aphids by cornicles, they have these little tailpipes on their posterior end. That's one way to identify aphids. They primarily have the same body shape, and you'll notice there are very small ones and large ones. That's because the small ones were born live. They will mature into the large ones, and eventually, when the population gets very dense, as you see in the picture to the right there, that's my right, you'll see winged adults, which is the picture all the way to the left. Those winged adults will fly off and start a new population. They might just fly as far as another leaf, or they may move to another plant. That's how aphids are going to reproduce, so we can understand their biology and what they do. Again, they're sap-sucking insects. So they insert a needle-like mouth part into the plant cells, and they suck out the plant sap, which is primarily sugar. Plants produce sugar through photosynthesis as a source of energy for themselves to grow. And so the insects suck that sap out of the cells, but they don't retain that sugary sap. They only retain things like amino acids and proteins. The insects excrete that sugary sap, and it's excreted in a form called honeydew because it looks like drops of dew and it's sweet like honey. Unfortunately, that honeydew can also create other secondary issues. One of those is a sooty mold fungus. Sooty mold is a fungus whose spores float around in the environment. They're microscopic, we don't see them, but they land in that honeydew, that sticky, sugary substance, and then that becomes a food source for the sooty mold to grow. So you may have seen this black sooty substance covering some of the leaves in plants in your garden. That means that you have or have had a sap-sucking insect dropping honeydew on those leaves. Honeydew also attracts ants. Ants use honeydew as a food source. Yeah. So you'll often see plants moving up and down the stems of your plants into the leaves. And that's because you have a sap-sucking insect. It could be aphids, could be something else, whitefly, which we'll talk about. And so that's an indication that you should inspect your plants, although you should be doing that on a regular basis anyway to know what's going on in your garden. That's an answer, a good indication something's going on there that you probably want to manage. Aphids and other sap-sucking insects create plant damage. Oftentimes that looks like leaf distortion, where the leaves get curled or twisted up. We call that epinasty, and that's just from their feeding habit, from damaging the plant cells as they feed. And last but not least, aphids and some of these other sap-sucking insects can transmit virus diseases from a sick plant to a healthy plant. That's not a huge concern for most of us in the garden, but it can occur. So when you see discoloration of a plant, as a matter of fact, I saw some on a lettuce leaf in one of our gardens here at school the other day. Sure enough, there's a small population of aphids. And so I'm imagining that's probably where that virus was transmitted from. But again, it's not super common, not something you should be extremely worried about. Whitefly, everyone's second favorite to hate, I think, especially if you have some of the favorite host plants like hibiscus and plants like that whitefly tend to really love to feed on. Whitefly are those small fly-like or moth-like insects that flutter around and congregate on the bottom of your leaves. Some of them do produce these white hairy-like filaments that you see on the pupa here in this bottom picture. Those are pupa life. Whitefly goes through 5 or 6 stages from egg through pupa or instar to adult. And so these adult whiteflies are developing inside these little pupal casings. And these pupal casings develop these fringe of filaments. And the giant whitefly, which everyone wonders, what is all that white, beard-like stuff hanging off on my plant? That's from giant whitefly. You can see here in this picture of the pupa that it indicates that the pupa of this species of whitefly turn dark when they're parasitized. And what that means is that there is a natural enemy or beneficial insect, the very tiny little wasp, that has laid its egg in some of those pupa. And as that wasp egg develops into a larva and feeds on the inside of the whitefly pupa and then matures into an adult, it's effectively killing off the whitefly pupa. So it's helping us to reduce the population of whitefly. You'll see here the picture that says emergence holes in whitefly pupa from a parasitic wasp. What you're looking at there is the hole that the wasp made in order to exit from that whitefly pupa. And above that, those are healthy, mature nymphs of citrus whitefly. You can see the whitefly sort of skeleton, so to speak, developing inside that pupa. These are microscopic, and you need a magnifying lens in order to see these pupa. But I guarantee if you have a population of whitefly that's shown, like shown here, there are plenty of pupa there. What you want to look for is evidence of parasitization. There we go. The parasitic wasp. Okay, what do we do about these aphids and whitefly when we find them? Again, you're going to have some numbers of these. We just want to control or manage, keep those numbers low. So before you put your plants out, check surrounding areas for sources of aphids and remove them. Weeds are one source of aphids. And so if the weeds are gone, the aphids can't move in from the weeds into your desired plants. If you're starting seedlings at home, you can grow them under protective covers until they're hardened off and large enough to put out in the garden, but you're still going to keep an eye on them for the aphids and whitefly. You can prune out or pinch leaves with large populations. If you find a leaf that's particularly dense in population, clip that leaf off and dispose of it. Throw it away, and you just reduce the population quite a bit. You may have to remove more than one leaf. Just don't remove so many leaves that you reduce the plant's ability to photosynthesize, because that reduces its source of sugar and energy for growth. If you have ants, excuse me, moving up and down the tree trunks or stems and leaves of your plants, you can coat or use this sticky material, a band of it around the trunk. And you'll see here in the picture at the bottom where there's a protective material between the trunk of the tree and the band of sticky material. Some of you may be familiar with materials like that. You always need to protect the bark or the stems of the plants when using that material, because it is a petroleum-based product and it can damage the tissues of the plants. So what happens, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. The ants get caught in that sticky material. The ants then cannot farm the sap-sucking insects, right? The ants will fight off the natural enemies that come to feed on the sap-sucking insects, because the ants are using that honeydew as a source of food. So keep the ants down. The natural enemies can come in and help you win that battle against the pests. You have to keep that sticky material stirred up. If it dries out, it's no longer effective. And sometimes the ants will build a bridge of dead buddies, or I should say use a bridge of their dead buddies to crawl through the sticky material. Ants are very tenacious, as we all know, so keep that material stirred up. Additionally, sap-sucking insects are very attracted to plants that have succulent, weak growth from high applications of nitrogen fertilizer. So know what your plants need in regard to fertilization and nutrition. Never apply more nitrogen than is necessary, and follow the fertilizer labels and apply appropriately for your plants. You can also knock off aphids and whitefly with a strong spray of water from a high pressure hose. The whitefly will sometimes fly off and then come back, but if you can knock off those pupa stages or instar stages, that goes a long way to reducing the population. You'll want to do this in the early morning hours when the plants will still have a chance to dry out, so there's no promotion of disease and things like that by splashing water. So always do this early in the morning, and it is pretty effective, and at the same time you're putting water on your garden. There are a couple of, I call them the new kids in town. These are more recent exotic pest introductions that can have a huge impact, not only on our home gardens, but on commercial production here in San Diego. And I know you're all familiar with citrus and avocado production and et cetera. So we always ask that when you're out scouting your own gardens for insect and disease issues and managing those, that you keep an eye out for some of these more exotic pests and report them if you do see them. This one in particular is the Asian citrus psyllid, or ACP. Its feeding habits transfer a disease from infected citrus trees to healthy citrus trees, and unfortunately most, if not all, of the trees that are infected will die from this disease. It makes fruit inedible and unsellable for our citrus producers. So if you come across an insect like this, you can identify it. First of all, in this bottom left picture, it is the adult has mottled brown wings, a pointed front end or nose, and red eyes. It feeds similar to an aphid, except that it rests at a 45-degree angle while it's feeding from the new growth of your citrus trees. So no other citrus pest feeds in that manner. So that's one way it's really easy to recognize. But they are very tiny. So inspect the new growth of your citrus trees. If you notice, for example, that you have these waxy, curly-Q tubule-like things on the new growth, that is an indication that you have the younger stages or nymphs of this insect. And that is their sort of honeydew production from sap sucking. If you find them, please call the hotline and somebody will come in and take a look. Another bug that is often, I'm not sure how often, but it is more common in community gardens, organic farms, and residential vegetable gardens, is Bagrata bug. It's a harlequin bug. There's a whole group of harlequin bugs. This one in particular likes vegetable gardens and particular types of vegetables like the broccolis and things like that. The reason I point them out here is that the younger stages, these go through gradual metamorphosis. They have the same coloring as a lady beetle, for example. So again, pest identification is important, as well as natural enemy identification. So these are not a good bug. We do want to try to reduce their numbers by checking your plants regularly. Use soapy water to dispose of them into buckets if you find them feeding on leaves. And then they lay their eggs in the soil at the base of the plants. So if you gently disturb the soil without damaging your plant roots, you can often reduce the number of eggs that will hatch into viable pests. So keep an eye out for those. We'll move on to spider mites. Spider mites are also a sort of sap-sucking insect, but they do a different kind of damage. They don't excrete honeydew, but they do cause leaf mottling or discoloration of the leaves. And you can see here when populations are very high, they create this webbing. And you can see by the leaves in this picture, that poor plant, that plant can't photosynthesize very well with the reduction in the green pigment chlorophyll because it's been destroyed by the spider mites. So not only is it unsightly, but it's also reducing the plant's ability to grow vigorously. So we want to manage spider mite, but I want to say right off the bat that using any kind of pesticide on a spider mite, except for maybe horticultural oils, is going to cause a greater problem for you because there are lots of natural enemies in the spider mite group of organisms, and I'll talk about those in a bit. To control spider mites, you want to keep your plants from becoming terribly dusty. They do thrive in a dustier environment. Every now and then, again in the morning hours, it doesn't hurt to wash your plants off if you see that dust is developing. And then again, using pesticides will also harm the good mites, the beneficial mites that are always found in and among the population of pest mites. And then the pest mites resurge much more readily and easily than the natural enemy mites. So you end up with a worse population of spider mites by using pesticide. Again, these are microscopic organisms. If you start to see some discoloration of leaves where it's looking mottled or there's white areas or specks, it looks dusty and feels kind of grainy, then you probably have spider mite. You can, sorry, I'm going to step back. You can also, again, use a high pressure hose but keep the dust down, grow the plants healthy, and make sure they have the appropriate water for their needs. We'll move on to the chewing insects, like caterpillars and grasshoppers. They obviously chew with their mouth parts. They go through complete metamorphosis from egg, larva, which you see here, to the pupal stage or cocoons, and then the adult moth or caterpillar. We can tolerate some number of these in the garden as long as they're not reducing the leaves in your garden to the point where the plants can't grow vigorously. There are also lots of natural enemies I'll talk about, but you'll notice that they like to blend in to their environment. So you need to look for them underneath leaves, on the leaf petioles or the stems that attach the leaves to the plant. And very often you'll find them actually eating on the leaves or chewing the leaves when you look for them. They tend to eat from the edges of the leaves inward. Sometimes they'll eat the veins, but oftentimes they'll leave that major mid vein or central vein alone. And so you can determine that you may have some caterpillars or even grasshoppers in the garden. Caterpillars will leave behind a frass, their little excrement pellets. And you've probably all seen some of those that collect on the leaves or areas on the ground around the plant. That's an indication that you have some feeding caterpillars as well as the leaf damage. Snails and slugs, again, chewing mouth parts, but they chew irregular holes with smooth edges. Sometimes from the edge of the leaf, but oftentimes right out of the middle of the leaf. And of course, their slime trails help us to identify them. They can chew fruit and young plant bark as well. The best way to deal with snails and slugs is to trap them. Baits alone will not effectively control snails or slugs. They actually have to come in contact with it. If they get rehydrated after consuming the bait or crawling through the bait, it may not be effective in killing them. So go out and find where they're hiding. After the sun comes up in the morning, you can find them collected under things like ice plant and shady, cool places. You can create barriers. The copper strips do work where they get collected and then you go out, scrape them off and throw them away. Or you can also build your own traps for the garden using boards similar to what you see here. You can use hollowed out cantaloupe rind or other melon fruits that's been hollowed out, turned upside down in the garden with enough space for them to crawl underneath. You collect that rind and throw it away in the morning. Caterpillars, you can hand pick, clip and dispose of infested foliage where you see webbing or eggs potentially. Again, you might have to use a hand lens for some of this, or where you see numbers of caterpillars, you clip those and throw them away. And microbial pesticides like Bacillus thuringiensis or BT are great for use in the gardens and a least toxic method if you have a bad infestation of caterpillars. Grasshoppers, if you can catch them, you can hand pick them. You can also divert them from garden borders with a green border, something that they prefer to feed on, and then try to collect them there. Otherwise, insecticides are not effective. The grasshopper actually has to come in contact with or consume the pesticide. The one pesticide that's often used is called, the active ingredient is carbaryl, and it's especially toxic, and it's just not very effective. Normally, grasshoppers are not a huge issue. You can usually tolerate a little bit of damage. Otherwise, if you do have a big issue with them, you can try trapping them. I know it's a challenge. Otherwise, maybe try a green border with something that they prefer to feed on to keep them out of your garden. I'm moving on to diseases here. I mentioned Fusarium and Verticillium wilt. Many of our vegetable varieties are now resistant to these diseases. They attack mainly herbaceous plants, tomatoes, for example. One of the ways you can determine that you might have one of these issues is that you'll see wilt symptoms appear first on just one side of a plant. And you can see here the one side of the plant, the leaves are turning yellow and wilting, but the other stems on the other side of the plant seem healthy. Normally what we do when we see yellow leaves on a plant is water. That's not often the solution. Always check soil moisture before you apply water in that situation, because you may be helping to promote the problem rather than just watering your plants because they need it. Oftentimes, yellow wilting leaves mean excess soil moisture. The roots are not functioning properly to take up nutrients, and take up water and nutrients. And so you see wilting and yellow leaves because the roots are too wet and they're rotting. In the case of Fusarium and Verticillium, you can see in the stems here that the water carrying tissues have been infected. And so they're not functioning even if the roots are to move water through the plant. And so you have a wilting plant. If you find that you're having a problem with this kind of thing, you would have to cut your stems in order to find out. Make sure you clean your tools afterwards and don't use them to cut something else. Again, avoid overwatering. It's the #1 cause of poor plant health. And if there are organisms, some presence of these organisms in your soil, you're only going to promote the problem by overwatering. Provide good drainage. So if you have a very heavy clay soil, you want to amend with organic matter to improve the soil structure and improve drainage. Avoid applying excessive fertilizer, especially nitrogen. Again, that creates weak, susceptible stems. And then this map here at the bottom shows you when a good time for soil solarization would be if you find that you have an area that you think would benefit from treating with that solarization process. Powdery mildew disease is a fungal disease that infects the leaves of many different plants, many different types of powdery mildew. The main thing with powdery mildew is that it will infect plants that need full sun and are getting too much shade. It might infect them anyway, even in the full sun, but it won't be as, it won't proliferate near as much because it doesn't like a full sun environment. Shade and moderate temperatures increase and encourage the disease. So make sure plants that need full sun are getting full sun. Use resistant plant varieties. And then if you do need to treat, you might use a fungicide like an oil or a sulfur, a horticultural oil or a sulfur. In most home gardens, what we find being infected with powdery mildew is, the squash and plants in that family are very susceptible. The good news is that powdery mildew is not spread by water, so you don't have to worry about splashing that around, although other diseases can be spread by water. To control powdery mildew, good air circulation is key. Pruning plants for good air circulation, like your tomatoes. We often put tomatoes in cages, and that can encourage poor air circulation, so you can prune out some of those stems or allow your tomatoes to spread a little more widely by trellising or something like that. And then if you do need some type of fungicide, there's a Bacillus subtilis, BS, right? It's formulated for this type of fungal disease to help reduce the population. And again, plants that need full sun need full sun. They should be grown in full sun. Nematodes, as I mentioned, are microscopic roundworms that exist in the soil. They infest plant roots. So sometimes you'll see them infesting like root systems like tomatoes, but you also can see them infesting some of our root crops, parsnips, carrots, things like that. Crop rotation is the way to deal with these. Never plant the same family of plants in the same area year after year or season after season, because you're just providing food for these nematodes and increasing their population. Don't allow irrigation water from infested plants to run off because the nematodes move with water. And again, oftentimes the varieties we buy now are resistant to nematodes. But just keep an eye out if you're starting to see stunted tomato plants. The tomatoes just don't seem to be taking up the water you're providing. You could possibly sacrifice one to see what the root systems look like. And here we are, weeds, one of our #1 pests. And they are pests because, as I said, they compete for all the things that our desired plants need. Weeds are really plants that are growing where they're not wanted. So many different plants, or any plant, can be called a weed if it's growing somewhere where you don't want it. But our more common weedy species, dandelions spread by wind, the creeping wood sorrel, some people call it oxalis, sow thistle, and petty spurge. They all harbor insects and disease that can move into your crops. And if allowed to flower and seed, you will have these weeds spreading around by wind. Some of them spit their seeds long distances. And if you allow them to become established, you'll be fighting them for a long time. So get them before they flower and seed. Get them out by the roots. So a tool like this, I call it a dandelion fork, goes down into the soil so you can pop that root off deep enough that it won't resprout. And you do that for all perennial weeds if you can't pull them out by hand. The time to pull weeds is when the soil is moist, because they come out much easier, the entire root system. But continue to deplete the leaf growth if you can't get the root system out and they continually resprout. Just get rid of that sprout and eventually you'll deplete the root reserves or stem reserves underground that allow that weed to resprout. And then mulching is great, not only for weed control or management, but also for moisture retention in the soil. Mulch should be applied to a depth of 3 to 4 inches and should be kept 3 to 4 inches away from the woody stems of your plants, because the moisture will also cause problems if allowed to sit up against the stems of the plants. You can cover with some kind of a weed cloth or weed barrier previous to mulching, and that will do an even better job. Of course, some of the weed seed is going to blow into your mulch. It should come out rather easily if you get them early. All right, so we've looked at why pest ID is important, how applying those appropriate control measures is geared towards those specific organisms, and using these multiple or combined methods together rather than just relying on one method like pesticides. So how do we encourage natural enemies? And then we'll look at those reduced risk pesticides. As I said, natural enemies are those organisms in the environment that prey on or parasitize plant pests. And lady beetles are a good example of that. They eat numerous aphids throughout their lifetime, both in their adult stage, which you see here, and in their larva stage. And I'll show you that in a moment. Resources to help identify natural enemies. Some great ones, again, university publications, and that's because they've done the research. They take fantastic pictures and provide some awesome information. So again, you can get these publications online. Pests of Landscape, Trees and Shrubs, There are pest notes online at that web address there, and you'll be getting these web addresses in an email. And then the Natural Enemies Gallery online, there's also a Natural Enemies Handbook, which is one of my favorite little publications. The pictures are fantastic for help with identification. So we're going to encourage natural enemies. Remember, they're in the environment. You oftentimes see them, but you might not recognize them or know what they're doing there. When we use broad spectrum pesticides that kill all insects, we're killing the natural enemies as well. If they're allowed to populate your garden, they will help you. Keep in mind that there has to be some number of pest organisms for them to feed on and parasitize and go through their life cycles. So if we tried to eliminate all the pests, then we wouldn't have any natural enemies either. So plant a diversity of flowering and non-flowering plants for good habitat. Keep the dust down on the plants. Use those least toxic selective pesticides, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And again, control the ants. You can see ants here are farming mealybug on this particular plant by collecting the honeydew and fighting off the natural enemies that come to feed on the pest. You can use ant bait to do this. It's the best, and we talk about this in the ant presentation later on in June. Spraying for ants is only killing a small number. It's not going to be effective. Baiting for ants is the best way to deal with them. And then again, use that sticky material to keep them out of the plants. But let me remind you, don't put it directly on the stem. The picture you see here is not the correct way to do that. You should protect the stem with a material, band of material before you apply the product. Here are some very common and very helpful natural enemies. The convergent lady beetle and her larva stage to the left of her there. They look very different because this insect goes through complete metamorphosis, but both stages eat aphids, as you can see the adult lady beetle doing there in that picture. And then the bottom green lacewing, that's the adult on the right, and her larva to the left, also consuming an aphid. You've probably seen these green or brown lacewings around, and they are huge consumers of soft-bodied insect pests of all different types. Natural enemies of whitefly, there are lots of them, and oftentimes a whitefly outbreak will occur when the natural enemies have been destroyed or disturbed from the use of pesticides or dust buildup. So again, encourage the natural enemies. I won't spend a lot of time on these here. I see I am getting close to our 11:30 end time here, but I do want to point out again, the green lacewing also goes through complete metamorphosis along with the minute pirate bug. And you can see here the egg, larva, pupa, and then adult. So it's important to learn to recognize all stages of the metamorphosis so that we can recognize these natural enemies when they're in our environment. Natural enemies of mites, the western predatory mite and the red mite, as well as the green lacewing. I mentioned earlier that there are always natural enemy mites or beneficial mites among the population of pest mites, and you can see them here in these pictures. They move much more quickly under a hand lens than a two-spotted pest mite would, so we'll learn to recognize those as well. Natural enemies of caterpillars and grasshoppers, birds and chickens. They also have parasites, these little flies that come along and lay their eggs inside the eggs of the caterpillars, or lay their eggs on the body of the caterpillar and then they then infest the caterpillar, doing away with it and reproducing themselves. And you can see that life cycle of the hypooster parasite. Yeah, I need to say that for practice. Natural enemies of snails and slugs. The decolate snails are great. If you see these spiral snails in your environment, encourage them. This is another reason not to use snail bait if you have those kinds of snails, ducks, chickens, and rats, but you're not going to encourage the rats just to deal with your snails. So again, trapping snails is the best way to deal with them. And we'll move on here to reduced risk pesticides. Again, sometimes they're necessary, but they should be used in combination with those other non-chemical methods. And we want to use the least toxic pesticide that will manage the pest. Often we won't have to, but if we do need them, we want to use the narrow range insecticidal soaps or oils. Neem oil is one of those. And use these only in the early morning hours. You're going to spray it onto the plant where needed only. You don't have to coat an entire plant or an entire garden unless you have that sort of problem. When the plants are not water stressed. So make sure your plants are well watered. They've taken up water before you apply the soap or oil. Over application of these materials can dry out the plants. And high temperatures can also cause some burning of plant leaves. So use them early in the morning. Give the product a chance to dry before the sun gets too intense and when temperatures are low. You want to avoid the use of insecticides that kill the natural enemies, those broad spectrum products that kill all insects. Products that contain these active ingredients here, carbaryl, pyrethroids, diazinon, or imidacloprid are particularly disruptive to natural enemies, and that will make your pest problem worse. The pests resurge much more easily after an application of something like this than do the natural enemies. So read your pesticide label and look at the active ingredient and try not to choose those more toxic ingredients. Azadirachtin is the active ingredient derived from neem oil, so that would be a good active ingredient to look for. And as you saw in the video on watersheds, San Diego County has 11 watersheds. We live in a beautiful area, and if we can reduce the movement of these materials into our watersheds, the better for all of us, the environment, and so that we can grow healthier gardens and reduce the use of the chemicals by using the integrated pest management strategy. And we want to do that because the water is so important to us. So read those pesticide labels and follow the directions when you have to use them. Store your pesticides in a safe manner. Whether it's least toxic or not, it still needs to be stored safely, and disposed of unused pesticides properly. And there's some references here, phone numbers and resources on the next slide that will be sent to you after the presentation so that you can use them yourself and make them readily available if you ever need them. One of the best resources I know of is the Master Gardener Hotline. So they're available to answer your gardening questions and help you solve problems of all types in the garden. These are the resources I've used for the presentation, and again, you will receive a copy of that. And then I'd like to invite you to join us for our future presentations. I hope in our first ever Healthy Garden, Healthy Home Zoom workshop that it was helpful to you and that you'll be able to join us for these future presentations. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Scott and Ann and Sue to share the chat questions with me. If your question's already been answered, thank you for attending. We appreciate it very much. If your question has not been answered, please stick around and we'll have a 15-minute question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Okay, Carolyn, are you ready for number one?
I am ready.
Okay, this is from Marlene. I have a question on fruit tree. I planted incorrectly. Instead of 2 inches above the ground, I'm now 4 inches below. Too hard to dig up the tree. Anna apple, Santa Rosa plums. 4 years in the ground, both producing. In winter, they will fill with water 4 feet across. If I add dirt, it will be above the graft. Help.
Yes. So adding dirt is not necessarily going to help keep moisture away from that crown, right? Where the trunk meets the roots. So I would not recommend adding soil. But what you may be able to do is remove soil, right? So that you remove the soil to expose gently that crown area and some of those roots, or try to grade the soil so that the water flows away from the trunk. I hope that would be a solution for you. Otherwise, you may be able to put in some drainage tubes, but you would have to drill the soil down and put in some drainage pipe or tube. It has holes all along the pipe, and you put it in vertically so that the water will travel into the tube and flow away underground rather than sitting on top. So that might be another option.
Okay, then we have a question from Andrea. What material do you use underneath the tanglefoot on your tree trunk?
Hi, Andrea. Yes, thank you for asking that. Tanglefoot, when you buy it, may come with a little cardboard, like a cardboard strip that you can use. You just want to get it tight. Otherwise, you could use some kind of cotton batting or an old strip of cotton sheet that maybe you wrap around the tree a couple of times. The trick is to get that wrap tight enough against the trunk that the ants can't get underneath it. If your plant is in the process of growing and maturing, you're going to have to loosen that band so that it doesn't constrict the growth of the trunk in that area. But just about any material that you can get tight enough around the trunk and that you can apply the tanglefoot to should work.
Jennifer wants to know about katydids. Are they common in San Diego? She thinks that one of them have been eating the leaves on a plum tree, and how do we manage those?
Katydids are here in San Diego. I see them from time to time. I also see their little egg masses from time to time, but they're sort of like grasshoppers, actually a lot like grasshoppers. In that they usually are not found in high numbers here at all, not like we would back east or the southern US. So, you know, if it's eating a leaf here and there, that might be something you have to tolerate. If you do have high numbers of them, you can try to trap them. I do recommend going to the UCANR website and looking for that particular pest and some solutions to that, some suggestions for solution. You may be able to create some traps. We do this with the fig beetles or fruit beetles, those slow buzzing big green beetles. We use a trap here at school. We take a 2-liter bottle and cut the top off and put a hanger on it. And we put a sugar water, so to speak, in that bottle. And the beetles are attracted to that. They fall down in there. So I'm not saying that katydids are attracted to that sugary water, but something like that. You may be able to find a solution for those online if you have high enough numbers. I would be surprised if you have that many.
How about using eggshells to kill snails? Maureen wants to know.
Hi, Maureen. I don't really know that eggshells are effective. Snails are able to recover from, most injuries except for squishing. I don't know that eggshells are sharp enough to really to do damage to the snail's foot, that it crawls along on. So I would say that you're trapping and picking. It's a proven fail-safe method for your snails and slugs.
Oh, so we have another question about
Excuse me?
bugs. Pill bugs are eating seedlings. Can we use Sluggo on that?
No. Sluggo will not work on the sow bugs or pill bugs, the roly-polies, right? Their populations can be damaging when they build up in high numbers. Again, I would go to the UCANR IPM website and look for suggestions about how to manage those. You may have to, if you see them crawling all over the soil, the best thing you could do would be to scoop them out and continue to do that until you stop seeing quite so many of them. I don't like to recommend a soil applied pesticide. You have to be careful about that, especially if you're growing edible crops. And then crop rotation. They like things like strawberries and things of that nature, seedlings. You're going to have to reduce that population before you put seedlings out in that bed again. So scoop them up off the soil. Try crop rotation with something that they don't favor as much, and look at the UCANR website and sources like that for solutions to those particular insects.
Diatomaceous earth work at all?
I'm not familiar, Judy, but it's something I would look into.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ann, you got some?
Okay, yeah, I have a bad case of spider mites and I've been told to spray with soap on 30-year-old camellias. I live next to the 78 freeway. New growth is lush and green. Old leaves are orange green. Can you see red spider mites throughout the property on my cactus? Or I do see, sorry.
The red spider mite, that's going to take some identification. You could possibly collect samples of that and take it to, I guess you can't do that now, the Department of Agriculture. Scott, do you know if there's any way to get those mites identified via picture or sample?
Like what part of town does, well, there are, the Ag Commissioner's office has reopened, I think as of Friday, and their entomologist,
Yay.
Dr. Tracy Ellis, would be able to do identification on that. There are 2 locations where you can drop those samples off, or you can mail them in. There's a location in San Marcos, and there's a location in Kearney Mesa. And if you go on the County of San Diego Department of Ag Weights and Measures website, they can give you the information about how to submit those samples.
And I suggest that you get them identified. You might remember from the presentation, there is a red spider mite that's beneficial. It's a natural enemy. So we want to make sure that the spider mite you have is not an issue, that maybe it's a beneficial, and it's there because it's feeding on 2-spotted spider mite or some other pest organism. So on your camellias, living close to the 78, you're probably getting a lot of dust, and you're going to want to spray that down again early morning hours. Hopefully there's good air circulation around the camellias. If there's not, you might need to do some pruning to create a better environment for air circulation. And then you can use the insecticidal soaps for the spider mite. Again, early morning. Don't over apply it. Give the plants a chance to dry out. And it should be helpful.
Speaking of soaps, can I make my own soapy solution, maybe with some dishwashing soap or something?
You can, but I never recommend that people make their own pesticides, because if you don't get the solution correct, it's either not going to be effective if it's too weak, or you could damage your plants if it's too much soap or whatever it is that you're putting in the solution. So the over-the-counter products, I know they're more expensive than making your own, but they are formulated for that purpose with specific concentrations of the soap or pesticidal product, and you're much less likely to do damage that way than you are with mixing your own.
We have many questions about large earwig problems. Carolyn, anything you can suggest to control their population?
Earwigs are a lot like those sow bugs or pill bugs. Once their populations explode like that, they will damage plant roots potentially. Otherwise, they'll eat strawberries. If you're not having those issues, they're just really a nuisance. And again, go to the UC IPM website for specific suggestions and control or management strategies for those insects.
Yeah. Just to chime in on that one, we are getting a lot of calls, a lot of questions with regards to earwigs. It's definitely a time of year when they're an issue. There are traps that you can make at home that can be helpful in reducing those populations. As Carolyn said, check out the UC IPM earwig pest note on how to construct those traps. And additionally, if you haven't already signed up for it, the Master Gardeners have a monthly electronic newsletter, which is called Dig It. And guess what? Snails and slugs and earwigs are going to be highlighted in the issue that's coming out in a week and a half. So check that out.
Right.
Okay.
And they'll get that newsletter if they're on the mailing list.
Yes.
Awesome.
If you're on our Master Gardener, mastergardenersd.org mailing list, that would be sent out. And if you're not on it, you can go to our website, which is mastergardenersd.org, and sign up for our mailing list.
And how about those big old hairy robbers that come in the middle of the night and steal the tomatoes? What you can do about that?
Rats, squirrels, all of those.
Raccoons, all those.
Oh, the raccoons. You have raccoons too, and possums. Yeah, you gotta love them, don't you?
Oh.
Yeah, they are a challenge. The vertebrate pests, the only thing you can do is exclude them. So they're going to come and pick them just right the day before you are going to, right? Because you're waiting for them to ripen on the vine, and they're going to come in right before you and get them because they also like them at that stage. So exclusion is the only thing we can do with the vertebrate pests, the rats, squirrels, rabbits, raccoons, all of those. I know it's difficult in some of our gardens and some gardens of size to exclude those critters. The larger vertebrates can be excluded with chicken wire cages and stuff that are secured into the ground or tied to a fence or something that they can't get through them. The chicken wire won't keep the rats out, and sometimes the small squirrels you can't keep out. So rats you should be trapping, and squirrels, you've got to manage those populations. If you have a real huge issue with that, I would again go possibly to the ag commissioner's office if you have a huge infestation of squirrels and things like that. But exclusion is the answer. So you need to learn about those vertebrates. How small of a hole can a rat get through? It would blow your mind. They can get through some pretty small holes. But the bigger ones, the raccoons can't do that. So we can exclude them a little more easily.
What about somebody has a question about aphids and rinsing them off. Well, don't they just go down somewhere that they can just come back up on the plants? And if they're down in the dirt, can they just, does the dirt need to be cleaned out before the next crop comes in?
That's a good question. Aphids are, once you hose them off, I suppose you might get, a very small number of them making their way back onto that plant or a different plant. But for the most part, most of them do not have wings and won't fly. Once you knock them off, they can't move very far, very fast. So once you've knocked them off of their food source, they are going to have a hard time getting back to another food source before they die. They're not the kind of insect that moves around easily.
Thank you.
And then we have a question about centipedes under the pots. Are they bad for plants?
Oh, those, I don't believe so, no. Again, the population is probably nothing to worry about. You don't see very many of those, in any one yard at one time. So, no.
I think we've covered it. What do you think, Judy?
I think we've answered all the questions. Yep. Thanks, Carolyn.
A lot of props to you, Carolyn. A lot of thank yous.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you get you can attend another.
One more quick question just came in. Slugs, how many are too many?
It depends. If you pick it up by accident, one. Yeah. They're the most disgusting thing I've ever touched in my life, and that's saying something.
I wanted to, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, I just want to take a few seconds to once again thank Carolyn for the wonderful job that she did. I want to thank Judy and Ann for helping us out with the chat room. I want to thank Leah and Sue. I'm going to hear about that one later. Leah and Sue for the help that they did in administrating this. And as we said at the beginning, this is a new venture for us. I think that both Carolyn and I had a sleepless night last night, wondering how things were going to go. But I think everybody,
still a little nervous.
I would think everybody would agree with me that Carolyn did an absolutely beautiful job, and we are honored and thrilled to have you as our presenter for the Master Gardener. So thank you all so much for joining us. Next workshop is going to be on how to grow a salsa garden. It'll be on May 30th. If you'd like to register for that, you can go to the link on our website, and we'll be sending out an announcement early next week. So thank you very much, and you all have wonderful days in your garden.
Yes, have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Do you feel good about it? You were great.
Pretty good.
You were great.
I say a lot, but I don't realize it when I'm doing it until later. I think, oh my gosh, I must have said that a million times.
Not quite a million, maybe.
Maybe 500,000.
I know there's still a couple more participants on, but that's okay. You were fantastic.
Well, thank you, Scott. But you're always so nice about it. And I appreciate it.
You were so personable and interactive, and you were fantastic. I mean, I literally got up and went over and talked to Gordon and said, I don't think I've ever seen Carolyn do such a wonderful job. This has been fantastic.
No kidding. Wow.
And you know how wonderful I think you are. So you did a great great. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just weird, but
you seemed comfortable with it. You seemed comfortable with the interaction. Were you looking at anything, or
I could see myself up in the right hand corner, And I felt like by just looking at the slides and then turning to my own picture now and then,
Mhm.
it felt more like I was just having an interaction. But I wasn't sure what the participants were seeing. Were they seeing me look off into Never Never Land, or?
No, it was,
I didn't know.
I mean, and you don't, I think from what I know about television, you don't want to look straight at the camera because that can be intimidating to people. So really kind of looking off to the side is fine, but having that conversation with yourself, isn't it weird?
It is, but it kind of worked.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's
I put somebody in the waiting room that was hanging out, but we
Yeah,
lost.
I can't remove that one for some reason.
Oh, well, there, I can. Okay. We lost Anne and Judy.
I'm not, did you guys?
I didn't kick him off, so.
I didn't kick him off either.
Hi, Gary.
I did, however, leave Gary on.
Great job.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Gary.
Yeah,
It's
good
nice
job,
to
you
see
guys.
you. Nice to see you. Congratulations on retirement. I didn't know you had retired.
Thank you.
So, Carolyn,
Yeah.
everybody, I thought that could not have gone better.
Oh yeah, that went really well.
Yeah, I thought it went really well
Thank
too.
you. Thank you. That I felt pretty good about it, except for the ums, and I just don't know what to tell you. about them.
I found out from watching videos of myself that I say so a lot while I'm teaching people to do things.
That's another
Right.
one. Yeah.
And I can't stop it, but I hear myself and I cringe every time.
Yep.
I'm gonna stop the recording, by the way.